This is AndyTube, and I am the real AndyTube, not a deep fake. And this is a real actual video that I'm making. That being said, this is the needle thread tension unit on a Singer Model 327K. This is the Spartan version, but the Singer badged version is the same. And this is, in my opinion, one of the best and easiest tension units Singer ever made, this particular style. You'll see this style on several Singer machines that use single needle sewing. And I have a problem with it, but I'm going to show you how easy it is to clean, fix, remove, repair, whatever you care to call it, this type of tension unit. And the 328 and 329Ks, they have a slightly different system right here on the front, which I'll explain part of in a minute. If you have one of those machines, I'm going to put a link in the description below and at the end of the video a link to take you to some tension videos for the type that's on the 328 and 329K, because they can double or twin needle sew. So this front part is just a little bit different. Everything else is the same and the principle is the same. Now I've taken off my pressure bar lifter, which has a dual function of moving a lever. When you lift it, it moves a lever, the tension pin releasing lever that pushes on a pin in here, pushing back on the spring to release tension on this. When you thread the needle or when you lift up and remove your fabric, it takes all the tension off the thread, so you can move the thread, pull it out, or when you wind it, when you thread the needle. And mine is not working properly here, so we're going to find out why. A lot of times it's just a cleaning. Sometimes somebody's played with it and not quite knowing what they're doing, they've messed something up here. So to get started with this, I'm going to turn this all the way left to 0, and this thumb nut, it's called, it's the adjusting thumb nut or whatever. We're turning it to 0, and I'm going to push back on this numerated dial. And I say push back because there's a spring inside called the tension spring or beehive spring. And when I push back here, I see there's little tiny holes all around here, and that matches up with a pin on the back of this. So when I push this in, it's away from the pin, and look, I can just turn it right off and take it off. Okay, and I think right there you can see the little pin that goes in these holes. See how easy that is? I'm going to take off this numerated dial. It's got 0 to 9 on it to give you a better look at that. See all the little holes? One reason I like this is when you're setting this up and you're doing what's called zero out the tension, boy, you can adjust it so minutely. Every one of those little holes is an adjusting point. Now this, I'm not sure if this is, yeah, I'd say this is aluminum, painted aluminum. It feels too stiff to be plastic, so it's even better that it's metal instead of plastic. So we'll take that off. Now the next is a little washer called a stop washer, because it acts as a stop for the spring. And this washer has a bar right through the center of it, and that's so that it can slip on this tension post or stud, and it goes right in the little slot. This is a slotted post, and that washer goes into the slot like that so that it doesn't turn, because this little finger up at the top here has to point out towards the front of the machine and work on a stop that is up in the numerated dial. See that little stop sticking out right there? So you probably notice when I said turn it all the way left to 0, it kind of stops there. When you turn it right, it stops the other way. So that's the dual purpose of this stop washer, to stop the spring from pushing out and to have this little stop finger that works on the numerated dial. Now we have our tension unit spring, and this spring is what squeezes the tension discs in here together to put tension on the thread. And it's called I mean, technically it's the tension unit tension spring or tension spring. Some people call it the beehive spring. Some people have called it the pyramid spring. But it's a pretty good strength to the spring. But you'll see that the last coil here, the little coil, comes right across horizontally, and for the same reason, that crossbar piece of it fits in the little slot so that the spring doesn't just twist all over the place. Okay, how clever they were, huh? This next piece is called the indicator. Does that sound right? Tension indicator. That's all. Tension indicator, not dial. Now, you see that this, and this is made from aluminum, not plastic. And the reason that's good is, see this little crossbar? Same kind of thing, you know, keeps it from turning, and it's called the tension indicator because it has the indication of negative and positive, or plus and minus. But on the plastic ones, this little bar tends to break, because when you lift the pressure bar lifting lever and it rocks that little tension pin releasing lever, that lever pushes out on a tension pin and hits right there. Maybe you can see there's some indentation from wear. And when it does that, it pushes it out just a tiny bit and pushes back against the spring so that it takes the tension off the tension disc. So I like this model. It's metal. Okay, so now we're seeing more of the stud and more of the parts here. And this part in the front with the little depressions in it, it's got like a little finger that comes up and plugs in a hole in the machine. That's called the tension thread guard. Is when you run your thread through here and it's moving all around, it guards the thread from, I guess we would say it guards the thread from like flying out. How's that? Or moving around or escaping. And tension disc assembly thread guard. And then there's the check spring. See that? You know about that, where that keeps tension on the needle thread as the needle's going down into the fabric. And then inside there's also 2 tension discs. So it's best to remove this as a unit, all these little pieces here. And and I'll explain why, is because the check spring, whoa, something fell out there that didn't belong in there. Maybe that's why my tension unit didn't work. I'll take a look at that in a second. But see how this check spring, or it goes around the other three pieces. So let's take a look at this first, okay? It's got a big coil on the back, or the far side, and it's got a small coil on the front. And on the last coil on the back, they bent the little tail of it in. So the last coil comes around, and then there's a little, about 1/16 of an inch that just boop, bends right in at a 90-degree angle. And we're going to call that the spring tail, okay? That little bent piece at the end, and I'll explain what that's for. So let me put that aside for a moment, and we'll just look at this tension unit thread guard. Again, a little dual purpose piece where this protects the thread that's moving through the tension disc, but it also has this little guide finger on it. So when you thread the tension unit and you bring that thread up over the check spring and drop it, it drops right in this little spot next to the finger. And I call it the finger guide because it keeps the thread lined up with the two discs as it's checking up and down and going through while you sew. It keeps it lined up right perfect with the discs. Okay, and now behind this are the two tension discs. Now on some models, like if you see the slant needles, like the 301 and the Slant-O-Matic 401 and the Rocketeer 500, those discs are flat, and you can turn them any way you want. These discs aren't flat. Okay, they're like little saucers. See, they're not flat. So when you put them together, you cannot, or you should not, cup them together like that, because the thread won't get in there. The thread can't get in there. So you put the two bottoms of the saucers together like that. Now it makes like a little V groove for the thread to go in and ride on, and then these two flat spots on the bottom, they pinch the thread perfectly. Okay, and we see these are smooth, they're not rusty, there's no scratches, they look really great. Hey. Okay. Now this thing that fell out is just like a plain washer, and I'm wondering if that's supposed to be on some other part of the machine, because it really doesn't belong in here. So I'm not sure. Maybe the tension releasing pin was too long, or somebody has been in here, because I'll guarantee it didn't come from the factory with this. So we'll hang on to it. Chances are we'll find something else on the machine that's not working right, and it's supposed to have a washer. Now there's a couple more pieces here. Back here, and these are thread guides, and they're both held together by one screw right on the front here. And I don't think I'm going to take those off because they look good, and they are not causing my problem. This is the upper thread guide. This is the tension disc thread guide. When you're threading, you can slide your thread off of that flat, whoops, blocking the light. You can slide your thread off of that flat spot, boom, right between the two discs. This little piece over here is called the rest or the stop for the check spring. So remember I said this check spring is made to keep tension on the thread as it's going down into the fabric. But once the needle pierces the fabric, the check spring comes to rest on this little finger that sticks out here on this thread guide. And that people call it the rest or the stop, and that's so there won't be tension on the thread when the hook comes around. So on the way down, right, there's tension, 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 and then as the eye of the needle pierces the fabric, that tension spring should come to rest on the stop. So there's no more tension from it on that thread. Now the hook's going to grab the thread and take it around and release it to make the stitch, the lock stitch around the bobbin thread. So for the hook to grab it and spin it around, it doesn't want tension. Okay, and then as the needle comes back up and pulls that slack up, this tension spring comes back into play. So if you want, you can remove this. I guess I'll remove it. I know I've done this 100 times, but maybe not for you. So it's just one screw here. You take this out, and then that's just a nice short little steel screw. Then these two thread guides come off, and like I said, they're stacked. The tall upright one goes on the machine first. The little hole, remember I talked about the thread guard with the finger, and then this is the screw hole. The second smaller thread guide with the disc thread guide and the little stop for the spring goes over the top of that. So if one of these was damaged or bent, or you wanted to get in here to clean something, you can take them off, no problem. So ours are in good shape, so we're just going to put them back on here. And let me get my tension screwdriver, my little spring screwdriver, and find that screw, and I'll put it back on. And you'll notice on this one guide on the front, there's a slot for the screw. It's not a hole, and that's made so that you can adjust the stroke. Let me pull it out. See how you can adjust it a little bit and then tighten it? And that is made to adjust the stroke of that spring. So you thread up your needle and you turn the hand wheel, and then just as the eye of the needle pierces the fabric, your spring should be resting on there, and if it's not, you loosen this and you adjust it a little bit. Okay, and normally what you see is it's kind of sits on a horizontal. That's a good place to start. And in that, some of the other tension videos I'm putting the links to, I go into a nice deep explanation about all that function. So we're good. Now what if your stud was all twisted up or bent or damaged here and not working right, and you wanted to replace it? Or what if it was all gunked up inside there with you know, thread dust and lint, and somebody put oil on it thinking, what's wrong with my tension unit? You can take this stud out by rotating the hand wheel until the thread take-up lever is all the way down. Okay, then if you stand up and look down from the top of the machine, of course you have to have the arm cover off. If you look right down in here, just like back there, right above where the stud goes in, you'll see the top of a screw, a little set screw that holds that stud in place. So you get a long, narrow screwdriver and put your take-up lever low, right? And then put your screwdriver right down in there and loosen a couple of good turns that are just even one full turn should do it. And then you're going to have to kind of wiggle this and pull it out. Okay, so this looks good. It doesn't look damaged. This should be horizontal, and it is. All these other parts, the parts I pulled off looked good. The only thing that was a little bit worn was that check spring. It's just a little bit cockeyed. I don't know, there. Maybe, I don't know, can you see it? Like right there, it's neat. It's just a little bit bent. So you can buy these and you can put a brand new one on. These cost a couple, $3 depending on where you buy it. And if the tail's broken off or it's bent and twisted so bad it won't work properly, you can very easily buy a new one and put it on. Over time they get bent like this from the thread pulling on them all the time. This one is bent a little more than average, and I think it's because somebody's put this washer, this extra washer in there that I'm still not figuring out why that was in there, but we'll see. But I think this will be okay. I think this is fine. Just clean it up. Now there's inside, before I mentioned that tension releasing pin, and it's like a little nail, and it sits inside here and sticks out the back of this stud. And remember when I said you lift your lever, it has this little tension pin release lever, kind of like a U shape, and it rocks over and it pushes on that tension pin. Now can you see that it's moving my screwdriver out? Hard for me to tell looking in the back of the camera. So that tells me that pin is in there, and that this tension pin release lever and the little spring that kicks it back and the tension pin and everything is doing what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to move that tension pin forward about a, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch or so, 3/32 to take tension off of those two discs, and it looks like it's doing it terrifically. Hey. Okay. So I think the weird thing is, and I have not seen this before. I don't know who put that in there. Why? Maybe they had some problem. They thought the spring was. But see, that would keep everything out. Oops. Can you see this? It doesn't fit back. There's a little kind of like gear shape on the end of this stud, and I'll show you how that spring tail goes in there. But it sticks out a little bit past the thread guard, so you can see this space here. It kind of just moved everything forward, and that's probably why lifting this lever up was not giving me movement or releasing the pressure on the two tension discs. Weird. Never know what you'll find in an old machine, huh? Okay, so about these parts now, they got kind of oily and smudgy and dirt and stuff. So I'm going to go clean them, and you've seen some of my other videos. I just dump all these in a strainer, and I spray them with a 20% solution, 15-20% of Crud Cutter, K-R-U-D K-U-T-T-E-R, cleaner and degreaser, a solution of that. And I mean, literally, you spray it and then rinse it off, and then I'll dry the parts like with a hair dryer. And I love that degreaser because it gets any old muck and stuff off of here just, you know, in 10 or 15 seconds on something like this. And at that strength, it won't hurt the aluminum or any of the metal parts or anything like that. And so I'm going to do that. If you don't have Crud Cutter, you know, you can put the parts in something like this and put some alcohol in there and kind of swish it around and rub them up and stuff like that, and you could get everything clean that way with just some alcohol. You could use dishwasher, you know, when you wash your dish by hand, like Lemon Joy or stuff like that. You could put a little bit of sudsy hot water in there and clean them up. The thing is to get whatever cleaning solution off by just rinsing them in plain water and then drying them very well. Because some of these, you know, like the spring, it might get some little rust spots on it if you don't dry, and the check spring and the inside of the thumb nut, you know, the little thumb. So that's one of the big secrets. You can clean it with several things, but rinse it well and dry it well. So when I get these clean, I'll just show you how we're going to just put it all back together. And I feel really good that it's going to work normally now that I found this and got it out of there. Huh. Okay, I'll be back. Okay, here they are. All washed and dried and beautified. Nothing like a clean tension unit, huh? Okay, so let's get it back together here and zero it out. When we put it back together, it's just kind of in the reverse. So we'll start with our two tension units. Put the bottom of the saucers together, right? And then we'll make this little unit to get it back on here. We'll put our thread guard with the little post up that's going to go in the hole, and then we're going to slip our check spring around it. Okay, and it goes on like this with the loop on the bottom, and the single loop goes in the front, right, and the big loop with the little spring tail goes in the back. And then you're going to slide those 4 pieces on and get them on the post, and just be sure that your loop goes around that last little coil goes around the stud and doesn't go in the slot in there. And then we're going to start slowly pushing it back, and we have to engage that spring tail back in the gear. Now this spring can be adjusted for tension and stroke, and if you go to the description below or at the end of the video and follow the link to my tension series, it'll give you all these big details about that. But pretty much if you put this together so that the loop hangs straight down, you're not going to have to do much adjusting, if any. Okay? So that's what you want. You don't want the loop pointed over here. You don't want it pointed back there. You want it hanging straight down. So think of it like that, the post, the straight up to go into the hole, and the spring going straight down. Like so. See how easy that was? And that should give you a very nice amount of tension on this spring. And at this point we're going to work that spring up and over. Remember that little stop? That little triangle that sticks out, the stop or the rest for the spring? We're going to work that loop up, over, and on top of that stop. Just like that. Wow. So easy, huh? Now we're going to put the indicator, tension indicator on, because that's what the little tension pin is going to hit. And you know, don't forget, you got to have your tension pin. If you took it out for some reason, you have to put that in there. So with the plus minus up, you're going to slide that right into the slot, just like so. That's how it's going to look. And at this point, you can test your assembly by just lightly pressing that, holding it against the parts against the machine, and you can lift your lever and see if that tension pin will push this out. Now, I don't have my pressure bar lifting lever, but I'll just use my finger to push that little tension lever inside, and we'll see. There it is. See how it's moving that out? Okay, so we're golden at this point. The next thing is going to be our beehive spring. And remember the little half coil, so that it can go in the slot. The curved part is going to go down. Okay? That little half coil, the curved part is going to go down. Now some people say the boat or the teacup shape, the curve is going to go down as you slide it on that slot. So that goes down, and then we have our stop washer, and the finger goes up. That little curved finger goes up and points right back at you. Okay, so when that's held in place and you're lifting this up, see, it's pushing back on that spring to release tension on the disc. Ingenious. Now we're going to put on the numerated dial. And remember I said there's this little raised piece inside there that is the stop. So when you turn it, that little raised piece hits the finger. So that raised piece, which by the way is behind the 0, okay, that's always where it is, right up there behind the 0, that has to be to the right of the finger, right? So if we hold this up, instead of at 0, because you might miss it, go to 1 or 2 and slide it on like that. Then if you turn it back while you're pushing on it, you'll feel it stop on that finger. Okay, so we'll just leave it up there at 1 or 2 for now. And then the last thing is this the little knurled thumb nut with the little pin on the back that's going to go in one of the holes. So we're going to push this against there. Going to go ahead and kind of get it about 0, close to 0. You got to keep the 0 to the right, and holding that in, I'm going to put this thumb nut on. Now that post is aluminum and the thumb nut's steel, so don't strip anything, just it should go on very smooth and so forth. Now I'm starting to get close to that numerated dial, and the pin is going to end up in one of those holes. There, just went in one, I think. There. Oh. So, did I go in one? Looks pretty good. I think I have it a little too tight because I can only turn it to about 3 or 4. So I'm going to push that dial, indicator, numerated dial back, and I'm going to turn this nut left a little bit, which is going to make less tension on the dial. And this is just a temporary thing. I'll show you how to zero out your dial. Let's try that. Okay, so we want to be sure that turning it left, it stops just past the 0, right? And now I can turn it in. There we go. That seems a little bit better. Okay, and then lift your lever and make sure that you see with your presser foot down, you'll see that these discs are tight together. The two saucers are nice and firmly together from the spring. But when you lift up your lever to release the tension and your indicator moves out, now you're going to see that it's really loose. See how loose that is? Because you're taking the tension off so you can thread your needle or pull your fabric out under the needle. Then we'll put it back down and you got your tension. And how much tension is going to be by turning the thumb nut and putting more and more pressure on the beehive spring. Alright, so we've done a great job, haven't we? If you're doing this on your machine, the tension unit is probably the cleanest it's been since the machine was made. Now, you know, you'd normally you're going to have your arm cover up here and your thread spool, and you're going to have your nose cover and all that kind of stuff. I don't have that on, so if you have yours on, put your spool of thread on the spool pin and go through your arm cover thread guide that sits right up there, the little chrome thread guide, I'm just going to get some slack on this thread. I'm going to lay it right over the top of the machine like that. Okay, and I'm going to bring it down here, and if I was going to thread the needle, I would be lifting this up to release tension. For me, I got to push my little finger in there, and then I would slide that thread on that flat chrome piece, and I would slide it in between the tension unit and up. Now I've got some tension on it. I would lift it up, lifting that check spring up and dropping the thread next to the finger guard, right? That little thread finger guard right there. Tension disc guide. So now my thread is between the tension discs. It's up through the check spring, and it's through that little finger to guide it. Okay. Now to zero it out, what we want to do is turn this all the way left to zero tension, right? And I know when you turn it left, it goes like, here's the zero and here's the straight line on the tension indicator. You know, it's a little bit off, but this is zero. And then you're going to pull your thread. That's it. You don't take it to the needle or the take up lever. You just pull it, and oops, you want it to just barely have any drag on the thread. So I'm pulling my thread back here a little bit. I got way too much out here. So when you see me pulling, I'm just going to be pulling that thread straight up in the air, okay, to pull it through the tension disc. And I'm pulling it, and it pulls pretty easy. I've got drag on it, but you see how it's lifting that check spring straight up? So it's not quite zero. See that? It's not, it's just a little bit more than zero. So I want a little bit less tension when I set it to zero. So I push in the numerated dial to get it away from the pin, and I'm going to try and move that pin like 1 or 2 holes to the left, because as you go left into the holes, it's going to have less tension on the beehive. If I turned it right a hole or 2, it would have more tension. So I'm going to push that numerated dial away, and I'm just going to barely turn that and get it in a hole to the left of where it was. So I'm at 0. Let's try it now. Oh, see how it just barely moves that check spring now? That's a good place. I like that. I'm going to keep it right there. It's just barely, I can feel it dragging. You know, I can feel there's a little bit of drag on it. And it's just enough drag to just barely bounce that check spring. So I'm good. I like that. Now, to see if the rest of it's good, I'm going to start pulling it straight up, and I'm going to start turning the dial 1, 2, 3, 4 like that. And every turn, it should get harder and harder to pull my thread, because it's going to have more and more tension. So there is barely a drag. I'll turn it to 1. Now you see how it's pulling my check spring straight up, and I can feel it. So I'm going to go to 2. Oh yeah, 3. Very firm. 4, extra firm. 5, harder. 8, difficult to pull. Oh, that's 6. 7, 8, 9. It feels like I'm going to break the thread. And then, boom, back to 0, and hardly any tension at all on the thread. I'm very happy. I've zeroed out my tension unit. So I'm done. Good job, Andy Tube. And that's it. You've just removed, cleaned, inspected, reassembled, and zeroed out your needle thread tension unit on your 327. And you did a great job. And you see how easy that is. There's no excuse for a dirty, lint-filled tension unit. There's no reason for that. And you can keep it clean now in the future by, after you finish sewing for the hour or day, turn your attention to 0, right, to release that. Lift up your presser bar to release the tension on the disc by pushing that forward, and you see now it's real loose. And then you can go in with a little brush and you can brush off the all the thread dust, all the lint and the dust that you get from sewing. Now the new polyester threads, they don't throw off as much lint as the old cotton, but they still throw, believe me. So you can go like this. Once in a while I'll run a vacuum on it. I know a lot of people like the canned air. I'm not a big fan of that because it can blow the lint back around the spring in the gear and get it caught in there. But that's better than nothing. If you do use the canned air, I like to, point it from the side in between the tension discs to try and blow the lint out. Don't point it like in and blow that lint into it. But that's it. It's all pretty. You're ready to go the next time you want to sew. Lift up your presser foot, get your thread between the discs, and then pull it up, right, over the check spring and drop it down into the next to the guide finger, and then go ahead and thread your machine just like it says in the manual. And you can test it at 0. Yeah, it's perfect. I go to about 3 or 4 where most sewing straight stitch is done. Yeah, nice and firm. Maybe zigzag, you go back to a 2, wide zigzag, 2, go back to 0, make sure it's clear. How sweet it is. So, now you know how to do it. And in the future, when you do this and you start sewing, if you feel the tension isn't quite right, you can put more or less tension on this by pushing back on the numerated dial and moving the thumb nut a tiny bit. A 1/16 of an inch, one way or the other, will put you in one of the other holes. Okay, so if you feel you have too much tension at 0, then you push in and you turn the dial left. If you feel you have not enough tension at 0, you can push this in and you can turn it a little bit to the right to move that pin into one of the other holes. Left is less tension, just like on your indicator. Left is minus tension, right is plus tension. So by moving that pin into the holes, and you can do that, like you may have been using a thread for a project and wow, everything was perfect, and then you change to like a bigger, thicker, heavier thread to hem a pair of jeans or something, and the tension feels like a little too tight. You normally sew at 4 and it's like, wow, something's weird here. You can just change it for that particular thread. You know, you usually don't have to. This type of tension unit is very forgiving. You know, you can get a lot of miles out of having it set at 3 or 4. But anyway, if you don't have a lint brush, you know, to do this, they're not expensive, and you can snitch one from a razor, electric razor. That's where this one is from, because it's nice and small and it'll like sneak in there real good and brush it out. The needle thread tension unit on the Singer model 327, 8, and 9K. Thanks for tuning in, and take care of that tension, and come back and see some more of my 450 or so videos that I got. You are welcome to comment, subscribe. If you're feeling rich, you can paypal.me/AndyTube and send me a couple of bucks for a cup of coffee, or for some more oil or parts for the machines I work on. But either way, come back and see me, okay? All right. See you next time. Bye-bye. Take care.